of the Investment Committee. I look to our counsel. Mr. King, is there anything that we have to report out of closed session?
Yes, sir. There were no actions taken.
Thank you, sir. Item number, and do we need to take roll again? No. Thank you, Mr. King. Item number 9 is the approval of the minutes of the July 14, 2016 Investment Committee meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 17 is I'm going to go out of order here, is opportunity for statements from the public. I do understand there are some members of the public that would like to speak to us. A couple of things. First and foremost, we have as a committee, we have a time-certain event that we would like to honor and meet this evening. At the same time, we want to be sure that we give folks an ample time to address the committee. And so if you are here to speak to the committee and you believe your public comments will be of 3 minutes or less, would you please come to one of the microphones? If you are going to speak for 3 minutes or less, would you please come to the microphone and identify yourself? And I ask that you honor our three-minute process that we have here. If you think you're going to speak for more than 3 minutes, I would ask that you would refrain from your comments until the end of our meeting, when we'll allow folks to speak for longer than 3 minutes. So if it's 3 minutes or less, please identify yourself, and if staff would put the timer up on the board, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Sir.
My name is Jake Davis. I'm here representing Chico 350. I know that time is short, so I'll jump right in. This is from an article in the Guardian newspaper out of jolly old England. An ongoing U.S. Department of Energy-backed research project led by a U.S. Navy scientist predicts that the Arctic will be virtually ice-free by 2019, 81 years ahead of conventional model projections. The project, based out of the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School's Department of Oceanography, uses highly complex modeling techniques that make its projections more accurate than others. The paper is highly critical of most global climate models, GCMs, noting that, quote, many Arctic climatic processes that are omitted from or poorly represented in most current generation GCMs do not account for important feedbacks among various system components. In layman's terms, he's referring to what's called self-reinforcing feedback loops. If you imagine a snowball rolling down a hill, it begins small. As it rolls and picks up snow, it gains more surface area, thereby picking up more snow, growing larger, etc. So it's exponential growth. And this is what's happening as the Arctic ice melts, exponential speed of melt. Unfortunately, beneath most of that ice and permafrost is bogs, millions of years worth of organic material that has decomposed in an anaerobic environment. That means without oxygen. When things decompose anaerobically, they create methane. So underneath the Arctic, the vast majority of the tundra is methane, lots of it. Why is that an issue? How much methane is under there, actually? Professor Peter Wadhams, he's the head of polar ocean physics at Cambridge University, wrote a paper for Nature magazine recently that estimated the total amount of methane trapped beneath the Arctic at 50 gigatons. That's 50 billion tons. In that same paper, he estimates that would cost the world economy $60 trillion and raise the global temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. The international scientific community tells us that the absolute red line that we cannot cross for climate change is 2 degrees, and this would put us up 3 to 5. We're in absolute crisis mode as far as environmental degradation goes, and it's time to do whatever we can. I know it doesn't feel that way. It's a beautiful day here in Sacramento, and everything seems totally great. But the international scientific community is telling us that we have a real problem here. And it's honestly time for all of us to do whatever is in our power to try to slow this thing down. So I'm here to ask you to please divest from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. This is an emergency, and we've got to do what we can. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next. Welcome.
Darcy Sweeney, I'm with Fossil Free California.
Welcome, Darcy.
Exxon knew, and we know that now, but it's still horrifying and nearly unbelievable that once Exxon scientists had established the relationship between the production and burning of fossil fuels and global warming, that Exxon chose to sit on that knowledge for nearly 40 years. Not just suppress it, but to embark on a campaign of climate denial and disinformation until some hardworking investigative journalists found them out about a year ago. Imagine what our world might look like today if Exxon had acted responsibly and ethically instead of perpetuating this gigantic fraud. Instead of having a few years to grapple with this crisis, we would have had decades to deal with the problem. There is a good likelihood that we would not be living with the nightmarish scenario that faces us today. Drought, floods, famine, population dislocation, die-off of species, and most horrifying, the possibility that much of the earth will become uninhabitable. That is what scientists are telling us is likely to happen if we don't change our ways, and soon. So my question is, why is CalSTRS still invested in this criminal corporation? One of CalSTRS' 21 risk factors focuses on the environment and reads in part, consideration should be given to how a company is dealing with the impact of climate change. Surely a company that lied for decades about the critical role fossil fuels play in climate instability cannot meet this standard. Please dump Exxon now, not a year from now, this year, and then the rest of your fossil fuel investments, quickly. Show the country and the world that CalSTRS is an ethical institution and that it understands and is willing to do something about the magnitude of the crisis that faces humanity. Don't put yourselves in the position of having to say to your children and grandchildren a few years down the road, sorry about the planet, kids, but we really needed those ExxonMobil dividends. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Next.
Hi, my name is Susan Sarnoff.
Hi,
I'm
Susan.
also from Chico 350.
Welcome.
And so at this time, and also a member of CalSTRS, retired teacher. At this time, when thousands of indigenous people and others are making a stand at Standing Rock to protect their water and their land, they call themselves protectors, not protesters. It seemed like a good time to read what a friend recently shared with me. It's referred to as the prophecy of Crazy Horse. Chief Joe Chasing Horse, a relative of the great Lakota warrior, translated it from the words of a grandmother who was present when the words were spoken, 4 days before he was assassinated. And here are the words. Upon suffering, beyond suffering, the Red Nation shall rise again, and it shall be a blessing for a sick world, a world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separation, a world longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. In that day, there will be those among the Lakota who will carry knowledge and understanding of unity among all living things. And the young white ones will come to those of my people and ask for this wisdom. I salute the light within your eyes where the whole universe dwells, for when you are at that center within you and I am in that place within me, we shall be as one. Those are his words.
Beautiful.
I am a skeptic, and I don't believe in prophecies, so to speak, but I do believe in wisdom, and some people seem to have much more than others, and can see more clearly the future results of present actions. I believe Crazy Horse was one of those deeply wise individuals, and he saw the writing on the wall. The question is, how much suffering will it take before we realize that we must do things differently and invest in what will serve the greater good, our children, their children, and future generations? The science is there, and it informs us how dire the situation will become, and in some places already is, if we don't change our policies and divest from fossil fuels and invest in a sustainable energy and a sustainable world. Someone told me before I entered the meeting today that this committee is only interested primarily in the financial aspects of this question and suggested that there was no interest in the moral or ethical argument. But I can't believe this is true because you all here have families, children, grandchildren that you love, and they will inherit this world. Thank you.
Thank you. As the next speaker is approaching, will you please, first name again was the last speaker's first name? Susan. Susan, would you see that the staff gets a copy of the prophecy that you read? Sure. Thank you. Come on up. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bill Vosberg, and I'm from Santa Rosa, and I'm a retired English teacher and a member of Fossil Free California. And we want to thank you for your steps last July in committing $2.5 billion to the new low carbon index. This is an important step, but it is only a first step. We don't know the details yet, but we wonder how much this new fund will reduce our current $5 billion investment in fossil fuel industries. We support complete divestment from all fossil fuels for moral and financial reasons. Teachers should not support industries whose business plans will destroy the planet within our children and children's lifetimes. Children and grandchildren's lifetimes. Moreover, we support divestment for financial reasons, which include poor returns on carbon stocks, lower oil prices, and the looming explosion of the carbon bubble, which means $20 trillion of stranded assets in this sector. We watched committee meetings over the summer on tape. I noted a board member stating that she had heard from teachers that they want to divest, and other members saying they don't want to lose money. However, I just want to remind you, this is a false dichotomy. We don't have to divest or lose money. It's not an either or. Carbon stocks have been a drag on several indexes for the last 5 to 10 years, according to several studies. We can make prudent and careful investments and make good money without having fossil fuels. As someone noted, ExxonMobil has been in the news recently for concealing knowledge about the effects of carbon combustion on climate change, a deception that dates back to the 70s. They also engaged in systematic disinformation campaign. They lied and paid scientists to lie to conceal those dangers. They may face fraud charges for deceiving investors, and yet our staff still prefers to engage with fossil fuel companies. In an interview last year, Mr. Ailman stated that regarding engagement, Exxon's a lost cause. I get that. I would add that other carbon stocks are a lost cause. Engagement never changes a company's core business plan, in this case, extracting, burning, selling fossil fuels. So why are we still invested in Exxon? Why are we still invested in other fossil fuels? This company and most carbon companies violate at least one of the 21 factors in our divestment policy. Number 19, the environmental risk, as well as number 21, the damage to human health. I didn't see a risk factor for deception and fraud, but there ought to be one for that. So I ask again, as a board member here asked at one of our meetings, why are we still invested in Exxon? Belief systems are important, but as your legal advisor reminded you on tape, we already have a divestment policy. It's time to invoke that policy. It's time to prudently and carefully divest our pension funds from all fossil fuel engagements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good day. My name is Anne Rothschild, and I'm here representing Trinity Episcopal Cathedral Environmental Ministry. And I'm talking as a mother and a grandmother. I'm speaking for my grandchildren who are not old enough to speak for themselves yet, to beg you to divest from fossil fuels and do something towards healing our damaged planet. It's a three-pronged issue. It's environmental, it's health, and it's economic. Environmentally, you know the damage that fossil fuels do. Our greed for electricity has contributed, and as teachers, we're supposed to be inspiring people with healthy values and good moral judgment. I can't imagine doing this in the classroom and talking about the health of our planet and the people who live on it, and then my pension fund is busy supporting these industries. So mountaintop removal is the coal mining industry that feeds our electricity, is destroying whole mountainsides and poisoning the water in Appalachia. You know about Exxon and the Gulf oil disaster. You know that fracking can contaminate whole aquifers, which are huge. So health is a big deal because the facilities that process our fossil fuels are surrounded by people who live there. And guess what? The people who live there are the poor and the marginalized, and they are the ones who are suffering health problems from the poisoning of the air and the ground in their area. Economically, I just read recently that the federal government has awarded a huge grant of thousands of dollars to the Appalachian area to help coal miners who have lost their jobs, praise be, to retrain for other jobs. So doesn't this tell you that the coal mining industry is not such a great investment economically? So I beg you, please, to do the right thing, the moral thing, the ethical thing, and the economically viable thing, and divest from fossil fuels. It's a huge movement, and why not get on board right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rothschild. Welcome.
Shifting gears, I'm not going to talk about that issue. I'm Doug Orr, professor of economics from City College of San Francisco. I'm also the chair of the California Federation of Teachers Retirement Policy Committee. And I want to thank you for allowing me to talk today. I also want to thank you for your effort that you've been putting into this process of creating a formal set of investment beliefs to sort of philosophically guide your investment decisions. And I'm encouraged by the draft list of those beliefs, which includes ESG issues as part of those beliefs. Your longstanding commitment to considering ESG issues is clear from two of your recent actions. First, the decision to commit $2.5 billion to a low-carbon index fund, which I think reflects your concern about climate change. And second, your proxy vote to remove the CEO of Sports Direct based on the allegations of health and safety violations and questionable pay practices at that firm. This second action indicates to me a commitment to incorporating the 21 risk factors, and particularly factor 18, which speaks to employee rights. A recent report by Professor Gordon of Oxford University, one of the most respected academic voices in the area of corporate governance and pension management issues, shows that incorporating ESG concerns into investment decisions consistently leads to improvement in long-term investment returns. But in addition, Professor Clark's work and my own work on pension issues have argued for broadening the concept of fiduciary responsibility beyond the narrow focus on financial returns. Incorporating ESG into your investment beliefs acknowledges this broader view. From this perspective, and this is my main point, this means that CalSTR's fiduciary interests may not always be the same as the financial interests of the financial managers with whom CalSTR's works. Because of this, developing a mechanism to ensure a closer alignment of these two sets of interests is something that the board should also be considering in your discussion of the investment beliefs process. So in closing, I want to thank you again for the efforts that you've been putting into in developing a set of investment beliefs, and I encourage you to continue to make ESG considerations an integral part of that decision-making process. Thank you,
Professor Orr. Our next guest.
Good afternoon, Alyssa Giacchino with Unite Here, Hospitality Workers Union. So I also appreciate the deliberative and thoughtful process this committee is undertaking to adopt a set of investment beliefs to guide investments in a way that safeguards the pensions of thousands of California teachers. As you well know, you are investing in a world with complex risks and variables as wide as the global economy, climate change, and as specific as labor disputes in hotels. In this context, I urge you to adopt environmental, social, and governance issues into your beliefs. I would echo Dr. Orr's comment that there is a body of academic evidence that it actually contributes to outperformance. But much of the academic work is based on studies of public markets, and I would emphasize that in your private asset classes, I think environmental, social, and governance issues are probably more important given the limitations on transparency, the illiquidity risks, the long-term lockup periods. I think ESG is essential for protecting pensions over the long run. So I urge you to continue to integrate ESG into your investment practices across the entire portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa.
I don't know whether it's better to be the last of the group or not. Marguerite Young with the Service Employees International Union speaking on item 15, investment beliefs as well. For those of you, most of you know me as the SEIU capital stewardship person for CalSTRS. One of the other hats I wear is as a public pension plan trustee for East Bay Mud, water utility in Oakland. We are going through the investment beliefs process as well. So I understand and appreciate very much the thoughtful deliberation that this board has put towards this. And what I've taken from the process that we've been going through at East Bay Mud, which I think is parallel here, is for me as a new board member at East Bay Mud to think about what's the end in mind? Why are these investment beliefs important for us? And they're guideposts. They're guideposts that help capture and memorialize the intention and practice of the organization in things like how Jack Enos was one of the founders and longstanding leaders of Ceres and the Investor Network on Climate Risk, or Chris Ailman's service now on the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Those things are, those actions, those activities are embedded in a belief by this organization over, well longer than I've been participating and watching CalSTRS, that these risks, environmental, social, and governance risks, are critical to the mind of the long-term investor and are not captured by the way that the market measures risk. And it's not captured by the way that the market judges efficiency. And as a fund that holds an investment belief that that the smart investor can do better than the market, ESG is the tool, one of the critical tools in your pocket. So I really do ask you to call that out, both in the investment belief number 5, in addition to governance, and to, as my previous colleague said, to apply it in the private markets, where the responsible contractor policy, so deeply embedded in the work of this organization, is a great example of using that as a manifestation of that investment belief. So with that, I say thank you, and good luck getting to your time-certain event this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Anyone else from the public wanting to address the committee? Okay, seeing none, we thank the public for your comments and your words. Item 10, Chief Investment Officer's Report. Mr. Ailman.
I am going to be very brief. One thing I want you to know about is we held an emerging manager open house here at CalSTRS. 2 weeks ago, we had over 100 participants. I have a note that I'll send you by email of a manager who just said their quote was absolutely perfect. So we're going to do it again. I'll make sure you guys get invited in case you're in town. But I just want you to know it was a huge hit. PERS did something the next day. Quick comment that I want you to think about. This is from John Williams, who grew up here in Sacramento. He's the president of the San Francisco Fed, that recessions are going to be deeper, recoveries are going to be slower, uncertainty and inflation will be higher. He also made the comment that rates will be lower for longer, and it actually caused people to think that what he was really implying is rates will be lower forever. The Federal Reserve governors did lower their version of a normal interest rate. So this is what they considered normal in the past was about 5.5. They've lowered it to 4. Let me get 4.5 was their average rate. They lowered it to 3. Not dramatic in terms of a 150 basis point drop, but that is 1/3 reduction in returns. So here's where we were. For the retirees, we were at 193 billion. Sorry, going too fast. At August, we closed obviously at 188 at June 30. Here's the asset allocation. We're very close to our targets. I want to emphasize for the teachers in the room, you're going to see the little pie slice of RMS grow faster. It was 1.6%. We think it'll be over 2 by December. And you'll probably see the other slices then adjust accordingly. Our cash position is pretty high at about 2.7, but that's because during the summer we know we're going to have a negative cash flow as teachers retire. Here's the portfolio so far this current fiscal year, which is obviously very short. Doesn't include the last few volatile days, unfortunately. Here it is over the last basically 3 years, so a much broader picture. You can see the volatility, but the fact that the market's really been choppy and not done a lot. Here's EFA, the non-U.S. market, and my point is this chart looks very different than the other one. You don't see the EFA market recovering in the last 3 years. It's actually lower and been very sloppy. So real quick, risks or the black swan events that are out there. Obviously, we know the uncertainty of the presidential elections. Oddly enough, I happened to take North Korea and Syria off, but I'll put them back on next time, thanks to our buddies in North Korea. Clearly, we do have climate change on there. We recognize that, as well as natural disasters with the issues in Italy. But that's where my comment is. Interest rates lower for longer, or is it lower forever? I'll also highlight, I'll send you an email. I want to highlight in the public report for the public's sake, INV 86, 88, and 90, some very interesting facts I'll email the board about, but everybody can read it there. So questions?
Any questions for Mr. Ellman? Thank you, Chris. Item 11. The General Consultant Semi-Annual Performance Report, Neil Rue from PCA. Welcome, Mr. Rue.
Good afternoon. On page INV number 92, there's beginning of your performance report. It lasts for approximately 100 pages or so, and I'm not going to go through every page. If you just flip to INV number 94, just to give a recap of the numbers, you can see that your portfolio was up 1.6 for the last year. And in a sense, over the last 3 and 5 years, met actuarial expectations, posting about an 8% return on average. Over the last 10 years, you posted about a 6. You can see that the portfolio is modestly underperformed policy. We just discussed the key issues behind that during a closed session, so I won't go into that too deeply. I think what's interesting is on the bottom table, despite all the discussions, all the issues, all the imperfections that we've been talking about, the portfolio versus your peers of very large public funds is actually done very admirably over the last lagging time periods. Just to put a little bit of spice on that, you can see the 3% return over the fiscal year to date is about median. You were in the top third over the last year. You were in the top decile over the last 3 years. And over the last 5 years, you're about in the top decile. So you've had very good results from a very high level at the total fund level over recent periods. So there's a lot of other information in there. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Rue? Neil, thanks very much. I do have one question. Mr. Rosensteel, let me get to you here. Mr. Rosensteel.
Yes, thank you. So a lot of these numbers reported in the back, which look at our portfolio and compare it to the benchmarks, the returns are gross of fees, and I'm just wondering why we get these numbers reported as gross of fees rather than net of fees.
One answer is for comparability. because when you're comparing yourself against your peers, they're all reporting gross of fees as well. So that's one quick answer to that. But I think.
But I mean, if we're comparing like active, active management to passive, for example, we're not being able to compare apples to oranges, apples to apples, based on what we're concerned about, which is, as Chris always tells us, it's the net returns that matter, right? So, I mean, if the net returns matter, I mean, I'm looking, for example, on INV 170, where we've got the U.S. equity active, that's our portfolios of 17.7 billion, and then the index, and so we're comparing with. So I'm just wondering about what is. Should we be getting the net returns, or can we get the net returns? I mean,
are those reported through the custodian?
Neil asked if those are reported to the custodian. Yes, they are. And in fact, we made a change a year and a half ago that all the published reports to the public are net. But you're right; these are still gross. But we can certainly provide PCA with the net returns. The one page at a glance, at the very end there, INV 201, 202 are net returns.
Right.
Paul, is that it?
Yeah, I just think I think it's more useful information to us to get net returns, and because we've done it in terms of our public reporting of returns, I think that as we've got to focus on costs, which we've made clear is an important issue, and it's one of the investment beliefs that we seem to have already agreed on. I think tracking costs then is something that we would end up doing if we're comparing net returns.
So on its surface, I think that's a very reasonable request and may serve us well. What I also would like to do, not now, I'd like to talk with Tom about this and also with staff and our consultants, given the fact that we're such long-term investors, how do we balance our responsibilities and oversight? Do we really need semi-annual reports, or would we be better off just with an annual report? But also to incorporate your question and concern, Paul, is how do we get a report that has net of fees? So I don't think it's a request for information at this point, but it's something that I'm committed to following up on with Tom and the staff to figure out whether or not, one, we could do, rather than doing semi-annual, just an annual report, and then also a report that gives us our returns net of fee.
I mean,
is that okay?
Thank you for number two. Number one, it wasn't my request, so
yeah, no,
I'm not going to weigh in on it.
Okay. Ms. Smith.
Yes, I just wanted to address your time cycle reporting for the semi-annual reports. So we went through an exercise in June to establish the investment time cycle, and we looked at the semi-annual report schedule, and we came back and we said that we would give you the full report for fiscal year end. That's reported in September. And then when we report again in April, we would not give you the 200 pages of information, but provide you a link with the data so that you can click on the link at your convenience, and that staff would be available, as the consultants would be available to provide information for you.
Mr. Rui, I do have one question. No one else is in the queue here. INV 96, where we get the 6 months, 1 year, 3 year, 5 and 10 year returns. Yep. The first bars up there are against the benchmark, and then as it relates to the median return. So over the 3 year period, excess returns is a point. What does that translate to in the dollar amount? I think I know, but
don't have an exact number.
Approximately.
Several $1 billion. Yeah. I mean, it's 1%
of 194 billion
of 175 billion. Beginning back 3 years ago, approximate, and running that every year. So that's ballpark $5+ billion.
Okay, thanks. So it was more than I thought it was, and I think that's it's meaningful.
Yes.
Yet the line above that, we're continuing to have challenges as it relates to the benchmark. I don't want an explanation now. I do want to put a request in. Perhaps it gets referred to the compensation committee, an analysis of the benchmark, the history of the benchmarks, how they were established. Are they artificially too low? Are they artificially too high? I just see a big disconnect over not necessarily the short term being less than 3 years, but 3 years and beyond. A disconnect between how the fund is performing compared to a benchmark and then how it's performing relative to the median institutional investors. So that's probably a compensation committee discussion and item, and we can work with staff and the appropriate consultants and the chair, Ms. Dillon, to look at that. Okay? Ms. Dillon, is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Rue?
No, sir.
Thank you, Neil. Item 12, Ms. McGee, Townsend.
I'm going to focus you on the returns portion of your materials. In your book, you have INV 207 and 208, and I'm not going to use the slides. Really focus on the compliance of the portfolio with respect to your funding, your risk exposure, your diversification by property type and geography, as well as your leverage. Your portfolio is well within compliance, and this does reflect a significant shift in the structure of your portfolio since the 2008 market crash and restructuring the types of risks that your portfolio wanted to take on after that experience. I will ask you to focus on investment, or INV 2009. And that page does provide you with the returns. In the upper left, we're looking at the performance of the total real estate. You can see that while the core and value are exceeding the long-term expectations and being very accretive to your portfolio, your high return portfolio continues to underperform return expectations, and especially on the 10-year period where we still have some of those higher returning portfolios that really underperformed given the market cycle. In the right-hand side of that page, we are focused on the performance when we exclude the legacy assets. Legacy assets, I'll remind you, are those that your staff can do absolutely nothing about. They were made prior to or including the 2008 market cycle. And when you take those out and look at the new philosophy, the new approach to managing risk, you can see that it really is being successful. It is enhancing your return both on a 3-year and on a since inception, since we don't have a 10-year period. That's just a specific period from July 1 of 2008 until the March 31st date. So in summary, your portfolio is doing well. The returns are where we need them to be. We'll again discuss the fact that we do expect those returns to moderate, and looking at that expected long-term return column, that's what we should see more of going forward and less of what we see in those 3-year and 10-year numbers.
Any questions for our real estate consultant? Thank you. Item 14. Private equity limited partner, Item 13 is the semi-annual performance report period for private equity. John Haggerty from Makita. We have signage. You're not Michael and McGee, and you're definitely not Deb Smith, so we'll be sure we don't refer to you guys as... I'm not so sure.
In terms of portfolio structure, there's no changes. There's roughly 2/3 of the portfolio buyouts and 68% in the United States, and we've talked extensively about the concentration in 2005 to 2008 vintage years. Performance is where we'll spend just a little bit of time. It was a modest positive value increase over the 6-month period that the report covers. And there was a there was a small decline in the cumulative since inception IRR by 20 basis points. On a long-term basis, the results are the same over peers and generating significant value on a PME basis. The activity is interesting, quite positive in a net cash flow basis, generating $1.3 billion in proceeds over this period of time, and the staff committed $1.3 billion to funds over this period of time as well. As mentioned, the market value of the program, $17.2 billion as of this snapshot in time, representing 9.2% of the entire retirement system. And broadly diversified across industries and the primary geographic exposure in the United States at roughly 70% of the portfolio. That's all we have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions for our private equity consultants, advisors? Appreciate the report and the two other reports that you provided for the committee. It's been helpful and empowering information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 14 is the Private Equity Limited Partnership Agreement Review. I'm going to turn this right over to our General Counsel, Mr. Bartow. And Brian, all you.
Thank you. This work was done by Senior Investment Counsel Jennifer Yamane. So,
Ms. Yamane?
Jennifer? Jennifer is available to answer any.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? The report is public. Does anyone have questions on the item 14? Seeing none, thank you. Item 15 is the Investment Beliefs Project. A couple of comments before I turn it over to Mr. Rue from PCA. We've embarked on a process that has brought us to this date. All board members have had an ample opportunity to weigh in either directly at board meetings or via a survey. Staff has been surveyed as well. The 6 beliefs that are on our materials today represent broad consensus of both the staff and of the board, the investment committee. Also that this is a living document. Beliefs are, we should consider this a living document. And as more is known and more is revealed and more facts become available to us, we can expand upon these. In October, we'll have our offsite. We'll have opportunity to hear from stakeholders and others. Although this is coming as a recommendation today, what I'm suggesting is that we just receive this as information item today, and then in November, a formal recommendation can come back to us. So we won't be taking any action on these other than acknowledging that there is consensus that these are the 6 beliefs that the committee and our staff has come to a understanding and acceptance of. Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Harry. I don't really have anything to add other than thank you very much to the board members. We have received 100% response rate from the board, and I think 99+% response rate from your staff who also participated in this as a confirmation of what everybody's thinking. So I just want to say thank you for that. The draft.
Can you just mention for those that perhaps are listening online, just read off the 6 that we've come to consensus on, the 6
Sure.
beliefs? Thank you.
Those beliefs, your working document begins on INV 256 with the description of the legal framework and a short preamble on the beliefs, and then the belief statements themselves are on INV 257. Belief number 1 discusses the benefits of diversification. Belief number 2 indicates that the global public investment markets are largely but not completely efficient, so the statement goes into there might be some place that you can exploit. Belief number 3 is there's clearly long-term benefits of focusing in on the costs of the plan and managing those. Belief number 4 indicates that CalSTRS will seek to internally manage their assets to the best of their abilities. Belief number 5 relates to corporate governance and says that proactive corporate governance is beneficial. And if you read through the statement in there, there is some recognition of ESG in that statement. And then belief number 6, that an illiquidity premium is capturable, and CalSTRS is going to pursue that.
Ms. Dillon.
So if we have suggestions on the 2 that we're adding to this list, say 5 and 6.
And 2, so 3.
No, I have things that I'd like to switch around or change within 5 or 6.
On those 2.
Do I just want to talk? Do we want to talk about that now? We want to talk about it later.
Why don't we've got a few minutes. I mean, if it starts to get pressing up against our hard 6 o'clock time, we can certainly
so
move forward.
And I know sometimes I get wonky with grammar and things like that, but I think it's what I'd like to change. I think strengthens what we're actually saying. So in number 5, in the first sentence we say based on standing Department of Labor requirements. I would think that I don't believe there's any reason why we need to say standing. Their Department of Labor requirements they're there. And some of this is kind of wordy, so I don't think we necessarily need to have words that we don't absolutely need. In the second sentence, it talks about CalSTRS profile as one of the largest institutional investors and a largely passive long-term investor. I think if we switch those 2 phrases around and say that we're a passive long-term investor and we're one of the largest institutional investors in the United States, that gives that particular part of it more punch. So I think it actually strengthens it. And then when I read this, Neil, I was really focused on what it actually was saying. And so I think that there was probably a typo here and I didn't catch it. But it's not ESG issued / factors, it's issues factors, right? Yes. I actually thought it meant, that was a term that I didn't understand. But after reading it, I think it's issues. Okay. And then in number 6, I hate it when that happens. Let me call up this is grammatical. In that first sentence, we say due to the inability to access. And we put cash within the parentheses, and it should be outside the parentheses.
The ability to access or convert.
Yeah. Because it's our inability to access cash as quickly as other known assets or to convert such assets to cash. So cash should be outside of the parentheses.
Good catch, as usual.
Anything else, Ms. Dillon?
Nope, that does it for me.
Okay. Mr. Bartow.
Mr. Chair, in discussions with fiduciary counsel, Mr. Lederman has recommended, based upon comments from board members, that in the 3rd paragraph on INV 260 under the legal framework, we have the 3rd paragraph has a statement of the constitutional provisions, and what's missing is the minimizing employer contributions. Following, in that 3rd paragraph, the sentence says, talks about retirement system and their beneficiaries, and defraying reasonable expenses in administering the system.
Yes, sir.
But it omits the phrase minimizing employer contributions there too. And Mr. Lederman made the suggestion that you want to add that in for completeness.
Noted. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Mr. Rosenstiel.
Yeah, I think that I'm glad we're waiting until October to finalize this, because I think the conversation we're going to have about ESG at the October offsite might help us, maybe fiddle around with Belief 5. I mean, I generally am comfortable with it, but I think there's ways that we might improve it. So I'm glad that we're going to take a a month on that one. I was interested in the public speaker who's an economics professor at City College of San Francisco, raising the idea that we might want to consider an investment belief that basically says our interests and the interests of our money managers are not necessarily aligned, and we need to attend to them. So I'd like to throw that open as something that we might want to add as an investment belief. I think it's a very wise idea. And then third, I think PCA in their written report was talking about belief 7, and which is managing drawdown risk, which while we actually have an investment policy now because we adopted RMS that says it's an important thing, and 100% of the staff said it was an important issue. We at the board level we didn't get to enough consensus to make that an investment belief, and they said that maybe we should have a conversation about why that is. So because I think it's a really important one. I think it's as important, if not more important than any of the other ones. So I'd sort of invite sounds like 3 members of this committee who said it wasn't important to explain why, because I think it's a really important issue, and that doesn't have to be. But I'd like to I wouldn't like the survey alone to dismiss that as an investment belief, especially because 100% of the staff said it's important, and 2/3 of the board members said it was important.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenstiel. So thank you for raising that issue, and out of respect for the time of the day and the validity of your question, where there was a disconnect between what the staff was saying and what we were saying, I'm going to suggest that at item 7 at the offsite is an appropriate place for us to review and discuss whether or not there's consensus and we want to add it. Okay, so may that be reflected in the minutes so that we do that in October. Any other questions? I'll summarize Ms. Dillon's number 5 is to remove the term standing, the third word in the first sentence, based on standing department. So we'll strike the word standing unless there's objection. And again, this is a living document, and we're not going to wordsmith this whole thing at this hour, but these things I think were simple enough for us to address right now. Make sure that the next document that comes back in October reflects this. Item and belief number 6. I think if I don't summarize your thoughts on this correctly, please let me know. Okay. But really, you want some reference to the size or the magnitude of CalSTRS referenced in belief 6.
No, it's actually 5.
Oh, 5.
And it's just flipping the 2 phrases around.
Yep.
I think if we link, do you need me to push a button?
Oh, I'm sorry, Dana. Go ahead. Yep. There you go.
I actually think it's...
That's for 5?
Yeah, it's 5. It's the second sentence where we talk about being a passive long-term investor.
Sure.
And the largest institutional investor in the United States. I think it's stronger if we link being the largest institutional investor and the importance of taking a leadership role.
Sure.
If we put those closer together, it gives that more weight.
Yeah, I would concur, and if maybe you could bring something back that just talks about the largest education-only pension fund in the world with over $195 billion, and that can just be amended. That number can change as the assets grow or diminish. But
and I'm fine just
but the magnitude of the fund.
Just switching the 2 phrases.
Is that
fine.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll have that in item 5. And then I think Dana was in 6 where it was just a grammatical edit there, removing parentheses. That's easy enough. And then the comment by council to include, where appropriate, the employer contribution, minimize the employer contribution. Okay? This is not an action item, but it's one step forward in the belief. Yes, Paul.
Was perhaps some suggested language that comes to us in October about the
alignment of interest.
Yes, yeah, we could have that as well. I don't want to debate that here either. I actually see it with the fees. I think maybe it can be put into 3, but They'll talk about it later. What are they doing with, what are they doing with your capital? Remember we met the author? What are they doing with your capital? Right. Okay. I started to. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's one area we have some control. We have a little control.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. And thanks, Neil, for helping.
Very good. This is, I think, a good next step. And item 16 is a review of information requests. And before you review those, Mr. King, I want to at least raise the issue. And I don't know if it's, thank you, Carissa, thank you. I don't know if it will fall under a formal information request or not, and if it does, maybe council can help frame this for me. It's specifically an interest that I have around risk in a industry specifically, and I admit I don't know whether or not this is an issue that we can or should take up, whether or not it can or will not be material, but I do think it's deserving of at least some ideas from our staff, and that could be through Ms. Sheehan's department, it could be through legal, it could be through the legislative, it could be through Mr. Al, it could be a myriad of places, but it's the pharmaceutical industry. I've communicated with some staff already that I have a concern, a growing concern, and again, let me repeat what I said. I don't know whether or not this is something we should take up, whether or not we have, whether or not it's on a cost basis benefit analysis, whether or not it's worth the time, the energy, or if we can effectuate change. But I would like staff's support, some suggestions around the risks associated with that industry, concerns that I have around executive compensation, potentially excessive compensation in the pharmaceutical industry. Price increases is another area of concern. A third is around lobbying and the potential conflict of interest between industries where they benefit from selling pharmaceutical drugs that are then pushed out into the market to consumers without, and who's backing that research. It wouldn't be the first time that there was a misalignment of interest, and more specifically around the movement and the explosion of heroin opiate addiction that's ravaging many communities across America. And again, I don't know whether or not it's something that's worth investing time, energy, resources, or whether or not we can actually do anything meaningful about. But I would like some guidance. And Mr. Keeley, it's a good idea, it's a bad idea. Here are some facts. Brian, you want to add anything?
I would, thank you. It is an industry with increasing risk. I mean, it's been an industry, but the lawsuits filed, the legal actions filed are increasing geometrically. There looks like they, by some of the actions of various drug manufacturers, are at least leading to possibly more regulatory and legal requirements, statutory requirements, which again would affect the risk of the investment. And then I do think that there's been a lot of analysis about just generally the business practices of the industry. And so I think it's perfectly appropriate, if you will, for us to work with corporate governance and come back and at least give you an overview of what's happening in the industry, where the pressure points are, where the potential risks are that shareholders should be aware of, and sort of I mean, I have a page open on class actions, and there's 6 cases just listed in the last month. So this is a very sort of risky industry, or industry with a lot of risk that I think shareholders should be aware of. So I'd be happy to work with Ann and her staff and with the chair and vice chair and try to come up with something that will be useful to the committee. And regarding the industry and the various aspects that you
I'm
mentioned.
sensitive to resources, human and financial, so I'm not asking people to drop everything that you're doing in your already busy, full lives. And if it's, as you begin to look into this and you think it's worthy of some pursuit and you need additional resources or some changing of priorities, please let us know. And if you start to look into this industry relative to our exposure to it and risks, regulatory, et cetera, and you think it's worth some time and energy, please just keep us abreast. I don't raise this issue as something that I want you to drop everything you're doing, but it's one that I think is worthy of some scrutiny and reform and change. And whether or not CalSTRS and institutional investors are one of the vehicles to create change in that industry, I would like to see us do that. Ms. Dillon?
I'm good.
You're good. Okay, so Mr. King, you want to review the information request for us?
Sure, yeah. In addition to what you just referenced regarding the analyzing the pharmaceutical industry, I just had one other open item or open session information request that was during item 11. And the request was for a overview and analysis of the policy benchmark. And that would possibly be taken up in the compensation committee.
Thank you, Mr. King. Any other information requests that we missed? Okay, seeing none, then we will go to the draft agenda for the November 16 meeting. Chris, do you have any, you want to reference that?
Thank you, Harry. Carissa just passed out a revised one, just so you can tear out the one in your book. We'll make it available. Certainly, it's just a draft for the public. The things I want to highlight, obviously, item 19, you have no book. I'm sorry, I'm very old school. I have a book. I use paper. I'm old. Item 19, we'll move that up to an action item. Jack reminded me the offsite agenda is very tight, so I'm not sure we'll get time to talk about those two, revising the ESG one. And I mean, it's about getting input about the ESG one, so I'm going to say we'll move that up to an action item, but make it more time so you can talk about whether to add to it. Certainly could be a first reading and then have a second reading later. I want to highlight for you and for the public item 15, which will be coming back to talk about thermal coal, non-U.S. thermal coal, and give you an update on that. And then item 16, that's our annual cost report, but this one is a special note because you asked us to report to you direct and indirect costs. So we're still on schedule to be able to bring you back the indirect costs on the portfolio at that point. We want to do a short update for you on the responsible contractor. I'm very excited about the work real estate has done to create a website. And then the other thing I want to highlight is item 11. That is your first chair and vice chair asked that we start having the speakers again. So again, that is Cartica Capital, ARM activist managers in the emerging markets, and they will talk specifically about emerging markets and how you deal with ESG in that space. So I think you'll really enjoy that. Teresa Barger is a great lady and, like I said, good friend for a long time.
Cool. Thanks. Anything else? Okay, does that bring us to the end of the day? I think it does, right? Is Mr. Derman here? Mr. Derman here? Ed, could you come here for a second? Ed, come on up. I didn't recognize you had a tie on. Ed, I know you've been waiting, man. Will you ring us out, man?
Oh, sure.
Thanks. We're adjourned.
There's a thing in the Senate where they say the desk is clear. That means everything's done. So the desk is clear. And we're adjourned.
Thank you, Ed.